Sarah Chen wiped the grease from her hands and squinted at the ancient farming drone spread across her workbench. The machine's internal components lay scattered like a mechanical autopsy, illuminated by the harsh glow of her workshop's lighting. New Darwin's third moon cast long shadows through the skylight, marking another late night of barely profitable repairs. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," she muttered, trying to match a replacement power coupling that was 3 generations too new for the drone's obsolete systems. The colonial frontier wasn't kind to mechanics who couldn't improvise, and Sarah had built her reputation on making incompatible tech work together. The grinding sound of her modified laser spanner filled the workshop when the ground suddenly shook, sending tools clattering to the floor. The drone's partially reassembled chassis slid off her workbench, and Sarah barely caught it before it crashed. Another tremor followed, stronger this time, accompanied by a distant boom that made her ears pop. She rushed to her workshop's entrance, palming the door control. The night air hit her face, carrying the acrid smell of burnt metal and ionized atmosphere. A streak of fire cut across the sky, trailing sparks and debris as it disappeared behind the ridge of Miller's Canyon, about 2 kilometers from her shop. Sarah grabbed her emergency kit and basic tool belt, more out of habit than conscious thought. In the 5 years since she'd opened her shop on New Darwin, she'd dealt with enough accidents to know that waiting for emergency services was usually a death sentence. The colony's infrastructure was as patched together as the machine she fixed. Her hoverbike coughed to life on the 3rd try. "Really? Tonight?" she growled, giving the temperamental machine's console a practiced whack. The anti-grav stabilizers finally engaged, and she shot off toward the impact site, following the trail of burning debris that marked the object's descent path. The crash site was impossible to miss. A deep gouge ran through the red soil of Miller's Canyon, ending in a smoking crater. But what made Sarah's breath catch wasn't the crash itself. It was the distinctive angular hull design of the vessel half buried in the ground. The sleek, predatory lines and dark metal alloy were unmistakable. This was an Imperial scout ship. "Holy shit," she whispered, approaching cautiously. Everyone knew about the Arcturus Empire. You couldn't live on the frontier and not hear stories about the galaxy's dominant civilization. But their ships never came out this far. New Darwin was too insignificant, too far from any strategic resources or valuable trade routes. The ship's hull was breached in several places, its sophisticated stealth coating cracked and peeling from the heat of re-entry. Sarah's practiced eye noted that the damage pattern was wrong for a simple crash. There were weapon impacts, partially masked by the crash damage, but definitely there. She pulled out her handheld scanner, checking for life signs or energy signatures. Nothing. The ship was dead, its crew either gone or... She pushed that thought aside and focused on the opportunity before her. Imperial tech was leagues ahead of anything in the colonies. Even a damaged scout ship could provide parts and data worth a fortune to the right buyers. The emergency hatch yielded to her universal bypass tool. Another sign something was wrong. Imperial security was legendary. This was too easy. Inside, the cockpit was empty, but the ship's quantum core still held a residual charge. Just enough to power up the main computer. As streams of data filled her portable terminal, Sarah's excitement turned to ice in her veins. She recognized the encryption format. It was similar to what the mining corporations used for their confidential operations, systems she learned to crack years ago when investigating environmental violations. What she found made her sick. Buried in technical specifications and mission parameters was the truth. The Empire wasn't just surveying New Darwin. They were analyzing its planetary core for exotic matter extraction. The same process that had, according to a heavily redacted report, caused 3 other colonial worlds to experience catastrophic tectonic events, resulting in total population loss. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands shaking. They were planning to kill her world, and they'd written it up like a routine mining operation. Sarah hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her workshop, usually a model of organized chaos, had transformed into a hurricane of holographic displays and dismantled components from the Imperial scout ship. She dragged everything salvageable back before colonial authorities could arrive, working through the night to stay ahead of the inevitable investigation. "Display quantum drive schematics, Section 6, she commanded. The workshop's aging holographic projector flickered, overlaying the Imperial drive components with the familiar blue glow of technical readouts. She frowned, comparing the sophisticated machinery before her with the diagram. Something wasn't adding up. The Empire's quantum drive was supposedly the pinnacle of faster-than-light technology, capable of calculations and power management that made colonial ships look like children's toys. But as Sarah studied the drive's inner workings, a strange sense of déjà vu crept over her. Computer, overlay standardized quantum drive blueprint, Hawking Martin's Series 5. Another hologram appeared, this one showing the basic drive design used in civilian ships throughout the colonies. Sarah's eyes widened as the two images aligned almost perfectly. "Son of a bitch," she whispered. "They're the same." Not identical, of course. The Imperial version was refined, streamlined, and built with materials she'd only read about in theoretical engineering journals. But the underlying architecture, the quantum field generators, the probability matrices, even the coolant circulation, it all followed the same basic pattern she'd been working with for years. Sarah pulled up her personal database, fingers flying across the haptic interface. Over the years, she'd modified hundreds of quantum drives, pushing them far beyond manufacturer specifications. Out here on the frontier, you couldn't always get proper replacement parts, so she'd learned to improvise. Her modifications were unorthodox, often breaking half a dozen safety regulations, but they worked. "They're using it wrong," she realized, excitement building. The Empire's engineers had refined the technology, but hadn't truly innovated. They'd followed the original design principles religiously, never questioning whether there might be better ways to configure the systems. Sarah grabbed her datapad and started running simulations. The Empire's drive modifications focused on raw power output, forcing maximum performance through brute force and expensive materials. But she'd discovered years ago that quantum drives could achieve better results through creative reconfiguration of the field generators. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall, especially when they think they're invincible." Sarah had been 12 when her grandmother helped expose New Darwin's largest mining corporation for environmental violations, not through force or political maneuvering, but by understanding their automated systems better than they did themselves. The simulation results made her laugh out loud. The Empire's standardization, their greatest strength in maintaining their massive fleet, was also their greatest weakness. Every ship in their navy used virtually identical drive systems, each one meticulously maintained to the same exacting specifications. Specifications that Sarah now understood better than their own engineers. She pulled up the encrypted data from the scout ship, focusing on the maintenance protocols. The Empire's ships were required to undergo regular drive calibration at certified facilities. Even the smallest deviation from standard parameters would trigger automatic alerts and corrections, unless those deviations appeared normal to the diagnostic systems. Sarah's hand shook as she started drafting modification plans. Small changes to the quantum field alignment, tiny adjustments to the probability matrices, nothing that would trigger immediate alerts, but changes that would compound under stress. Like a catastrophic engine failure waiting to happen. The Empire would never suspect a colonial mechanic could comprehend their technology, let alone manipulate it. Their own arrogance would blind them to the threat until it was too late. But Sarah hesitated before saving her work. What she was considering wasn't just sabotage. It was outright rebellion against the most powerful civilization in known space. If she was caught, the best she could hope for was a quick death. The alternative, though, was watching her home die, just like those other colonies. She thought of her customers, the farmers, the miners, the small-time traders who depended on her to keep their machines running. All of them unknowing sacrifices to the Empire's greed. Sarah saved the file and began to plan. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she approached the Imperial Command ship's maintenance bay. Her forged credentials had passed the automated security scan, but fooling the human elements would be harder. She adjusted her nondescript maintenance uniform and kept her eyes down, projecting the weary demeanor of an overworked contractor. The maintenance bay was a cathedral of technology, making her workshop look like a primitive cave. Dozens of repair drones buzzed through the climate-controlled space, their movements choreographed with military precision. Imperial technicians in pristine uniforms monitored banks of diagnostic equipment, their posture radiating the casual arrogance of those who had never known technological scarcity. Contractor Chen reporting for scheduled drive diagnostic. She announced to the duty officer, a tall woman with lieutenant's insignia. Bay 23. The officer barely glanced at her credentials. Try not to break anything, Colonial. These systems are slightly more sophisticated than the tractors you're used to. Sarah bit back a retort and nodded meekly. Inside, she smiled. Their contempt was her greatest advantage. Her modified repair drone followed her to the assigned bay, its casing deliberately scuffed and worn to match her Colonial technician cover story. The drone contained her most sophisticated programming, designed to interface with Imperial systems while masking its true capabilities. The quantum drive access panel loomed before her, its surface gleaming with the perfection only Imperial manufacturing could achieve. Sarah began the standard diagnostic sequence, her movements deliberate and slightly hesitant, playing to expectations. Having trouble with the interface, Colonial. A young Imperial technician appeared beside her, smirking. I can simplify the controls if you'd like. That would be helpful, thank you. Sarah forced herself to sound grateful and slightly intimidated. As the technician leaned over to demonstrate the simplified controls, her drone silently uploaded its first package of modified calibration data. The next hour was an exercise in patience and acting. Sarah worked methodically, appearing to struggle with even basic procedures while her drone executed its true purpose. Each small adjustment to the drive's quantum field generators was masked as routine maintenance, the changes subtle enough to avoid detection, but positioned to amplify under specific conditions. Warning: non-standard variation detected in probability matrix, the system announced suddenly. Sarah's pulse spiked, but she kept her expression neutral as the Imperial technician rushed over. What did you do? He demanded, pushing her aside to access the controls. Nothing. I was just running the standard maintenance sequence, Sarah protested, allowing panic to enter her voice. Please, I can't lose this contract. The technician ran a diagnostic, frowning at the results. Must be a sensor glitch, the variations within acceptable parameters. He made a note in the system. Try not to touch anything else. I'll sign off on the maintenance, but next time we'll request someone more qualified. Sarah ducked her head, mumbling thanks. Inside, she was triumphant. The sensor glitch was actually her drone's work, creating a false reading to mask the real changes she'd made to the system. As she packed up her equipment, alarms suddenly blared throughout the maintenance bay. Sarah froze, certain she'd been discovered. But the commotion centered around another bay, where a drive component had failed during testing. Incompetent Colonials, the duty officer muttered as repair crews rushed to contain the situation. This is what happens when we outsource maintenance to save credits. Sarah slipped out during the chaos, her drone following obediently. In her wake, she left a quantum drive that would function perfectly during tests and diagnostics, but would begin to destabilize when pushed to military performance levels. Back in her borrowed maintenance shuttle, Sarah allowed herself a shaky breath. Phase 1 was complete. The command ship's drive was compromised, and her modifications would be automatically shared with the fleet through their standardized update protocols. She activated her encrypted communicator, sending a single coded message to her growing network of resistance mechanics. The wrench is in the works. Across the colony worlds, others like her were preparing to do the same when the Empire's ships came for maintenance. Their own standardization would become their undoing, one drive calibration at a time. Sarah smiled as she piloted her shuttle away from the Imperial flagship. They'd never see it coming. After all, who would suspect a simple colonial mechanic? The underground repair forum, wrench and ratchet trading tips, lit up Sarah's datapad at midnight. She created the channel using salvaged Imperial communication protocols, hiding resistance discussions beneath layers of mundane repair advice and part trading. Looking for advice on quantum field harmonics in older Hawking Martins drives, wrote a mechanic from New Venus, their message encoded with the Resistance's private key. Experiencing unusual fluctuations after recent Imperial maintenance inspection. Sarah's fingers flew across the haptic interface. Try realigning the probability matrices using pre-Arcturus specifications. Had similar issues last week. Happy to share my diagnostic logs. The attached file contained her modified calibration data, disguised as routine maintenance records. Her workshop had become Resistance headquarters, cluttered with dismantled drive components and holographic schematics. But tonight, something new caught her attention. A message from Titan Colony, marked urgent. Imperial security increasing maintenance oversight. New protocols implemented after drive failures in Sector 7. Sarah cursed under her breath. She'd known they couldn't stay undetected forever, but she'd hoped for more time. The Resistance network now spanned 12 colonies, with dozens of mechanics implementing her drive modifications. Each success brought them closer to their goal, and to discovery. Connection request from user. Greasemonkey_426, her system announced. Sarah hesitated. New users were risky, but expanding the network was essential. She activated her security protocols and accepted. Been watching Imperial ships limp into our repair dock. The message read. Thought I was the only one causing accidental drive misalignments. Found your forum through encrypted maintenance channels. Need to talk. Sarah's heart raced. Others had been fighting back independently, just like her. She quickly drafted a response, including a coded verification sequence. Always good to meet another enthusiast. Tell me about your experience with quantum field harmonics. The response came with proof. Detailed schematics of Imperial drive modifications, different from her own, but equally effective. Greasemonkey_426 was legitimate. Over the next hour, Sarah coordinated with mechanics across the colonies, sharing techniques and warnings. Some had developed methods she hadn't considered. A team on Europa Station had found ways to corrupt the Empire's automated maintenance protocols. Others had created sophisticated diagnostic masks that made catastrophic failures appear as normal wear and tear. New Imperial ship just docked, reported her contact on New Venus. File name, Project_Goliath, massive harvester vessel. Uploading specs now. Sarah's blood ran cold as she studied the technical readouts. The harvester was unlike anything she'd seen. A planet killer designed to extract exotic matter from planetary cores. This was what they used to destroy New Darwin. They're not just building one. Another mechanic chimed in. There's a whole fleet in production. Saw the maintenance schedules. Sarah's mind raced. A fleet of harvesters meant the Empire was planning something bigger than individual colony exploitation. They were preparing for systematic resource extraction across the frontier. We need to accelerate our timeline, she wrote. How many ships can each of you access in the next standard week? The responses poured in. 3 ships on Europa, 5 on New Venus, 4 on Titan. More than she'd expected. The Empire's reliance on colonial repair facilities, born of convenience and arrogance, had given them unprecedented access. A private message flashed. Security alert on Proxima II. Imperial technician asking questions about drive failures. Pattern recognition software deployed. Sarah immediately activated emergency protocols, scrubbing location data from all communications. They'd prepared for this, but theory was different from reality. Everything depended on remaining hidden until they could act against all the harvesters simultaneously. She opened a new encrypted channel. Implementation of Protocol David authorized. Repeat. Protocol David is active. You have your assignments. May the wrenches be with you. Acknowledgements flooded in from across the colonies. In repair bays and maintenance docks throughout the frontier, mechanics began their work. Each small adjustment, each carefully masked modification, brought them closer to their goal. Sarah leaned back in her chair, watching the status updates scroll past. The Empire had built their fleet on standardization and control, never imagining that scattered colonial mechanics could comprehend their technology, let alone subvert it. Their greatest mistake was assuming that building something meant understanding it better than those who spent their lives keeping it running. Dr. Marcus Voss stood before the Imperial Science Council, his pristine white uniform a stark contrast to the dark chamber. Holographic displays showed cascading drive failures across the frontier sectors, each point of light representing another stranded Imperial vessel. "The pattern is undeniable," he declared, manipulating the display with precise gestures. 87% of all critical drive failures occurred within 3 standard weeks of routine maintenance at colonial facilities. This is not coincidence. The council members murmured among themselves. Admiral Chen, no relation to Sarah, but the irony wasn't lost on the universe, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting sabotage, Dr. Voss?" "I'm suggesting incompetence," Voss sneered. "We've allowed colonial mechanics to service our quantum drives without proper oversight. Their crude methods are degrading our superior technology." Meanwhile, Sarah's encrypted messages flew across colonial space. "Imperial investigation underway. Maintain radio silence except for emergency protocols." She worked frantically in her shop, modifying her programs to be even more subtle. The Empire was watching now, but they were watching for the wrong things. Voss's reputation preceded him. Brilliant but arrogant, he'd written half the Empire's quantum drive maintenance protocols. Alert! Imperial inspection team inbound to New Darwin, flashed across her screen. Estimated arrival: 6 hours. Sarah's hand shook as she initiated emergency purge protocols. Equipment disappeared into hidden compartments, diagnostic logs were corrupted beyond recovery, and her most damning evidence was transferred to secure off-world servers. Back in the Imperial chamber, Voss continued his presentation. "I've developed new diagnostic algorithms to detect substandard colonial maintenance practices. We'll implement them immediately, starting with—" "Dr. Voss," interrupted Counselor Zhang, "your own data shows no correlation between colonial certification levels and drive failures. In fact, some of our best-performing ships were serviced by these same facilities." "That's because they don't understand what they're doing wrong," Voss insisted. "These savages are accidentally damaging our drives through sheer ignorance. Look at these maintenance logs from New Darwin." Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw her logs displayed on the Imperial broadcast. But Voss wasn't seeing what was actually there. He was seeing what he expected to see. "Observe these crude adjustments to the quantum field harmonics." He pointed to her carefully crafted modifications. "They clearly don't understand the sophisticated engineering principles involved." The council chambers erupted in technical debate. Sarah watched through her hijacked feed as Imperial scientists argued over maintenance protocols and colonial competence. Not one of them considered that the crude adjustments might be intentional. "New contact request," her system announced. "User, Quantum Whisperer." Sarah's blood ran cold. The username was pretentious enough to be Imperial, but she couldn't ignore potential allies. She activated her highest-level security protocols and accepted. "Your work is elegant," the message read. "The harmonic cascade effect in the probability matrices. I almost missed it. Almost." Sarah's finger hovered over the emergency shutdown button. But the next message gave her pause. "Don't worry. I'm not reporting this. Some of us remember when the Empire valued innovation over standardization. Voss and his kind are so convinced of their superiority, they can't see true genius. Need help keeping him off your trail." Before Sarah could respond, her workshop's proximity alerts triggered. Imperial shuttles were entering New Darwin's atmosphere. Leading them was Dr. Marcus Voss himself, coming to prove his theory about colonial incompetence. "Time to play our parts," she muttered, activating her workshop's public facade. Every piece of Imperial tech vanished behind false walls. Diagnostic equipment was replaced with older models. By the time the inspection team arrived, they'd find exactly what they expected: a crude colonial repair shop running on outdated technology. As she prepared to meet her visitors, one last message flashed across her screen from Quantum Whisperer. "Remember, their greatest weapon is their certainty. Let them believe they're right, and they'll never see how wrong they are." Sarah smiled, straightened her oil-stained coveralls, and prepared to be thoroughly underestimated by the Empire's finest minds. Sarah's stolen Imperial shuttle bucked violently as another pursuit beam tried to lock on. She disabled most of the shuttle's transponders, but they were still tracking her through quantum resonance, a feature she hadn't known existed until 10 minutes ago. "Alert! Drive harmonics destabilizing," the shuttle's AI announced in its crisp Imperial accent. "Recommend immediate power reduction. Override safety protocols," Sarah commanded, her hands dancing across the controls. "Reroute auxiliary power to the quantum field generators." Behind her, 3 Imperial interceptors closed the gap. Their sleek forms reflected the light of New Darwin's trinity of moons, weapons primed and ready. They'd caught her slipping out of the maintenance facility after Dr. Voss's inspection had gone suddenly, catastrophically wrong. "Unidentified shuttle," a stern voice crackled over the emergency channel. "Your vessel is showing signs of critical drive instability. Power down immediately for your own safety." Sarah smiled grimly. They still thought this was about safety. The shuttle screamed through New Darwin's upper atmosphere, drives pushed far beyond their rated capacity. But Sarah knew these systems intimately now, knew exactly how far she could push before they failed. "Approaching jump threshold," the AI warned. "Warning. Unauthorized jump coordinates detected." The interceptors fired warning shots, plasma bolts streaking past her hull. They were still trying to save her from what they thought was a suicidal jump attempt. "Now, you arrogant bastards," Sarah muttered, activating the sequence she'd prepared. "Watch and learn." Her shuttle's quantum drive engaged, but not for a jump. Instead, it broadcast a specific harmonic frequency, one that resonated with the modified drives of her pursuers. The effect was instantaneous. The interceptors' engines flared brilliant blue, their standardized systems responding automatically to what they perceived as a calibration signal. For a crucial moment, their drives synchronized with her shuttle's frequency. Sarah killed her engines and dropped like a stone. The interceptors shot past overhead, their drives now locked in an escalating harmonic feedback loop. She watched as their engines stuttered and died, leaving them drifting helplessly in high orbit. "This is Colonial Transport Beta 9. She broadcast on an open channel. "I'm picking up multiple distress signals. Do you require assistance?" The response was a stream of Imperial profanity, but Sarah was already gone, her shuttle skimming the atmosphere toward the night side of the planet. In her wake, she left 3 of the Empire's finest ships being towed to the very colonial repair facilities they'd been warned about. Her encrypted communicator chimed. Impressive display. Quantum Whisperer message. Voss is apoplectic. He's demanding an investigation into how colonial technology could possibly interfere with Imperial drives. Is my identity compromised? Sarah typed back, guiding her shuttle toward a hidden landing site in the mountains. No, he's convinced it's impossible for a colonial to understand quantum harmonics at that level. He's looking for Imperial conspirators. Sarah allowed herself a small laugh. Her escape would be reported as another mysterious drive failure, joining dozens of others across colonial space. Each incident spread doubt among Imperial crews, made them question their own technology. But more importantly, each failure demonstrated to other colonies that the Empire wasn't invincible. Her network was growing faster than ever. Colonial mechanics who'd watched Imperial ships falter were figuring out the truth. They'd seen the pattern. how Imperial vessels seemed to suffer convenient malfunctions whenever they threatened colonial interests. New message from Europa Station, her system announced. Imperial Harvester fleet delayed by drive certification issues. Estimated arrival at New Darwin postponed by 3 weeks. Sarah began powering down her shuttle systems, preparing for a cold start later to avoid detection. She had 3 weeks to prepare for the real fight, and now she had the Empire's full attention, even if they didn't know it yet. Send response to network, she commanded. Message begins. They think they're chasing Imperial saboteurs. Let them waste time searching their own ranks. We only need to hold out until the Harvester fleet arrives. Everything is proceeding according to plan. As New Darwin's moons set behind the mountains, Sarah Chen, colonial mechanic, resistance leader, and the Empire's most wanted fugitive, even if they didn't know it, began plotting her next move. The Harvester fleet emerged from quantum space like a metallic storm cloud, 50 ships strong. Their massive forms blotted out the stars over New Darwin, each vessel larger than the colony's largest city. Sarah watched from her hidden mountain workshop as the Empire's ultimate expression of power took up position around her home. Fleet deployment complete, reported her network's encrypted channel. All harvesters in position. They're beginning atmospheric insertion. Sarah's hands were steady as she initiated the command sequence she'd spent weeks preparing. Across colonial space, hundreds of mechanics waited for her signal, their systems synchronized through the Empire's own communication networks. Dr. Voss is aboard the command harvester, Quantum Whisperer messaged. He's personally overseen the drive certification for every ship in the fleet. Your modifications have been purged. Sarah smiled. That's exactly what we wanted them to think. The truth was hidden in plain sight, buried so deep in the Empire's own protocols that even Voss hadn't thought to look. Every purged modification had been automatically reapplied by the fleet's standardized maintenance systems, which treated her changes as routine optimization updates. All units, execute Protocol David. Sarah broadcast to her network. Authorization code, wrench and ratchet. Across 50 Imperial ships, quantum drives began to shift subtly out of alignment. Each tiny change amplified the next, creating a cascade of harmonic resonance that spread through the standardized systems like a virus. In the command harvester's engine control room, alarms began to sound. Minor drive fluctuation detected, a technician reported, within normal parameters. Dr. Voss, standing at the main control panel, frowned at the readings. These harmonics, they're familiar. His eyes widened with sudden understanding. Emergency shutdown. All drives. This is. The cascade reached critical threshold. 50 quantum drives, each powerful enough to tear a hole in spacetime, shifted precisely out of phase. The effect rippled through the fleet in seconds. Emergency shutdowns activated too late, trying to stop a process that had begun weeks ago. Sarah watched as the mighty harvester fleet shuddered to a halt, their drives locked in an endless loop of automated correction attempts. Each ship's AI tried to compensate, following protocols that only made the situation worse. By all the stars, Quantum Whisperer message. You didn't just disable them. You've trapped them in their own maintenance protocols. Every attempt to fix the drives just reinforces the lock. The Imperial command channel erupted with chaos. Sarah had tapped into their communications weeks ago, and now she listened as the Empire's finest minds grappled with their impossible situation. Full system reset. Negative. Quantum matrices are locked. We can't even initiate emergency protocols. How is this possible? The drives were certified. Dr. Voss's voice cut through the chatter. This is deliberate. The colonial mechanic. It was her all along. Every maintenance visit, every certification, every standard protocol. We did this to ourselves. Sarah activated her workshop's quantum transmitter, broadcasting on all Imperial frequencies. Her voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. This is Sarah Chen, colonial mechanic of New Darwin. Your ships are now locked in a quantum harmonic loop. Every standard protocol you try will only make it worse. Your mighty fleet, the pride of Imperial engineering, has been defeated by the very standardization you thought made you invincible." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "But I'm also a mechanic, and mechanics fix things. Your ships can be restored, your drives recalibrated. The knowledge exists in the colonies you plan to destroy. The only question is, are you ready to negotiate?" The Imperial command channel went silent. Sarah waited, watching the motionless fleet through her workshop's viewport. She'd just turned the Empire's greatest weapon against itself, using their own protocols and procedures to bring them to a standstill. Finally, a new voice came over the channel, older, carrying the weight of Imperial authority. "This is Grand Admiral Zhang of the Imperial Fleet. It seems, Ms. Chen, that we have significantly underestimated the colonies. Perhaps it's time we had a discussion about the future of Imperial-colonial relations." Sarah looked up at the fleet, no longer threatening but suspended in their own technological hubris. "Grand Admiral," she replied, "I believe that's the wisest thing the Empire has said in a very long time." 2 months after the Battle of New Darwin, Sarah Chen stood in the gleaming atrium of the newly established Colonial Imperial Technical Exchange. The building, a fusion of imperial precision and colonial practicality, represented everything they'd fought to achieve. "The latest drive certification standards have been approved," announced Director Zhang, formerly Grand Admiral, to the assembled crowd of imperial and colonial engineers. For the first time in imperial history, these standards were developed through collaboration between imperial theoretical scientists and colonial practical engineers. Sarah watched Dr. Voss shift uncomfortably in his seat. He'd been appointed as the imperial liaison to the exchange, a position that forced him to work directly with colonial mechanics. The experience had been educational for everyone involved. Furthermore, Zhang continued, the Empire hereby recognizes the sovereign right of all colonial worlds to maintain their planetary integrity. The Harvester fleet has been permanently decommissioned, with the ships being converted into mobile research stations under joint colonial imperial supervision. The audience applauded, but Sarah's attention was drawn to her datapad. A message from Quantum Whisperer flashed across the screen. "Check the maintenance bay." Left you a surprise. Excusing herself from the ceremony, Sarah made her way to the exchange's vast maintenance facility. There, surrounded by a mix of imperial and colonial technology, stood a familiar figure, an elderly imperial engineer in a pristine white uniform. "Hello, Sarah," said the man who had helped her as Quantum Whisperer. "I thought it was time we met in person." "Chief Engineer Reynolds," Sarah breathed, recognizing one of the Empire's legendary designers. "You were helping us all along." "I've watched the Empire's obsession with standardization stifle innovation for decades," Reynolds said, running his hand along a hybrid quantum drive assembly. "Sometimes you need an outsider to show you what you've forgotten. Your modifications to the quantum drives, they weren't just clever sabotage. They were genuine improvements." Sarah nodded toward the hybrid drive. "Is that why you called me here?" "Look at the harmonic resonance patterns." Reynolds activated the diagnostic display. "Your crude modifications actually solved the phase variance issue we've struggled with for years. By forcing us to work with colonial mechanics, you didn't just save the colonies, you saved imperial engineering from itself." Across the maintenance bay, imperial and colonial technicians worked side by side, each learning from the other. The rigid hierarchy that had defined imperial technology was giving way to something new, a fusion of theoretical precision and practical innovation. "We're implementing your drive modifications across the fleet," Reynolds continued. "Properly this time, with full safety protocols. The efficiency improvements alone will revolutionize interstellar travel, and that's just the beginning." Sarah's network had evolved into an official technical advisory board, with representatives from every colony world. Their practical experience, combined with imperial resources, was solving problems neither side could have tackled alone. "There's still resistance," Sarah noted, thinking of the imperial hardliners who opposed cooperation with primitive colonies. There always will be, Reynolds agreed, but they can't argue with results. The new hybrid drives outperform anything we've ever built, and it all started because a colonial mechanic dared to think differently. Sarah's datapad chimed, a message from her workshop on New Darwin. Another Imperial ship had docked for maintenance, its crew specifically requesting colonial certification. The Empire built its fleet on the idea that standardization meant perfection, Reynolds mused. You showed us that true strength comes from diversity. In thinking, in approach, in perspective. A lesson we shouldn't have needed to learn the hard way. Sarah smiled, remembering her grandmother's words about big systems and their blind spots. Sometimes the hardest part isn't solving the problem, she said. It's getting people to admit there is one. As she left the exchange that evening, Sarah passed the decommissioned command harvester, now a symbol of change rather than destruction. Its quantum drive hummed with the modified harmonics she'd helped design, no longer a weapon but a bridge between two civilizations. The Empire had wanted to reshape worlds through force. Instead, a mechanic with a wrench had reshaped the Empire itself, one drive modification at a time. And somewhere in the vast expanse of colonial space, a new generation of mechanics was learning that the greatest victories don't always come from building the biggest ships. Sometimes they come from understanding how to make them work better.